Welcome to the Comfy Talk, a radio show about gamers and their stories. This episode features Mariteaux, one of the major contributors to the Guitar Hero 2 Deluxe project and occasional Quake map maker. You can find links to his works and projects in the description. Now it's time to get comfy and enjoy the show. How's it going, Mariteaux? Is it Mariteaux, or how should I pronounce your name?
Mariteaux, yeah, you've got it correct, roughly.
Okay,
I've heard it
so
pronounced a ton of different ways.
all right, so let's see. For me, it rolls off as a Mariteaux. I could try Mariteaux.
Yeah, it's up to you've got the gist of it. It's not. I've heard Mariteaux. I've heard lots of garbage. I don't know, but yeah, you've basically got it. Yeah.
Nice. All right, so what's the first thing you would like people to know about you?
I mean, as far as my work goes, largely I'm a game modder. I primarily work at this point on uh Guitar Hero games that use the Milo engine, which means Guitar Hero 1, 2, Rocks the 80s, and also the Rock Band series, and they're all on an engine called Milo. And I also have some work out for Quake, and I'd like to do some levels for other games too. And um, I
Okay,
don't know. It depends on what they're interested in knowing about me.
so those Milo Engine games, those sound like the PS2 games. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Okay, yeah.
roughly, roughly.
Because I think for Guitar Hero 3 they upgraded the engine or something when it was handed to
Guitar Hero
Microsoft.
3 Guitar Hero 3 runs on the Tony Hawk engine because Harmonix, their contract with their publisher, which was Red Octane, which was then bought by Activision, was up after Guitar Hero 80s, and as a result, Neversoft was looking for a new developer for the series. Excuse me, Activision was looking for a new developer, and Neversoft, who are best known for the Tony Hawk games, were apparently big fans of the series. They had played it a lot while they were working on, I believe, Proving Ground, and so they stepped in about 8 months or so, they had turned the Tony Hawk engine into a beat matcher that they could use for Guitar Hero 3, which is why it feels and looks so different.
Oh
So
yeah,
it does
they
not use,
Oh,
yeah.
sorry. Yeah, because also for Tony Hawk's Proving Ground, I think that's why they were also able to import the that one character in Proving Grounds, right? I forgot that from Guitar Hero 3, um,
It might have been Project A. I don't remember.
Project A.
My knowledge of Hawk falls off after the third one.
Right. Yeah, for most people, that's kind of the fall off point for most people. Maybe 4.
I mean, I've heard Underground's pretty good. I actually own a copy of Underground and I've never played it. Maybe I should at some point. I don't know.
It's actually a pretty good game. I do recommend it just as the just for being a Tony Hawk game. It also has a pretty good single player mode that's more expansive than the earlier games.
That's what I've heard, where there's like an actual story to it, and you can get off your board and walk around and stuff.
Yeah, that's some of the cool part of it. It just makes you feel like you're progressing through the like as being an amateur skater into a pro skater, and they make a big deal out of it, and all the questing progresses with you and stuff. Yeah.
Sounds fun. Yeah, I'll try it at some point.
So what's the origin of your username or handle?
So as far as Marito goes, um, I, as just me personally, me and friends, I do writing stuff, story writing stuff, and I had a world that I don't work on anymore. I'm kind of I started with somebody who was not a great person at all, and just kind of wasn't driving with me anymore. So it's gone. But at the time, so this was 2016, 2017, I was looking for a new username to replace the one that I had been using since I was like 8 years old. And one of the regions in this world, it was a fantasy world, and one of the regions in the world was the Mariteaux region, which I had picked from a name generator because it sounded like maritime. The whole thing was, it was kind of like a New England climate, a lot of uh, sea and stuff like that. So it made sense, maritime, and I just like the way it sounded. So I just, and it's never taken. So I always use it as a username. As I've learned over the years, nobody can pronounce it. So like I said, I've heard mariteaux. I've heard people say maritiacs. I've heard people misspell it in all these crazy ways. I had a gigantic list of them, and um, it's it's a relatively short name, but nobody can pronounce it, and that tends to be how I know that somebody is. Okay, I shouldn't say that. I was about to say that's how I know somebody's worth talking to, but that's a little mean. Um, but generally, the people who I tend to become good friends with, they can just say it right off the bat. I don't know. I'm not putting any stock in that, but that's something interesting I've noticed. My girlfriend never had a problem with it, because it's not really that complicated. It's just mariteau, if you know, not quite fake French words. It's kind of roughly. Yeah, there you go. So it came from a world that I was working on as a teenager.
Yeah, that's a pretty interesting take because yeah, like the way when you see a word structured and you're familiar with like pronouncing words from different languages, you just kind of start assuming how it might be pronounced. Because the first time I saw it,
Yeah.
I'm like I was like wondering, is it Maritakes, Merit
No,
something,
it
and
is.
then but it's
No.
Marito.
Yeah, it's a long O sound at the end of it.
Marito, like your toe.
Yeah. People. Yeah.
Yeah. And then yeah, and then like for me it'll roll off as Merida, like I said earlier. So,
And it gets the gist of it.
yeah. And so how did you get into gaming, or what was your first exposure to gaming?
Just gaming as a whole.
Yeah, in general.
Uh I I I probably have to chalk it up to the PS1. I was not born in the most affluent household, but I think it was more a matter of trust. Maybe they didn't trust the little kid, so I was obviously a little kid. Um, and so it was the teenagers and the adults who got to play with the new consoles, and I had gotten I don't know if it was a hand me down or if it was bought, but it was the redesigned PS1. That wasn't much bigger than the discs themselves, the white one.
Oh yeah, the one that's spelled out
Yeah,
PS1. Yeah, that one.
I loved that thing, and I had a bunch of games for it. And uh, then my mom sold it. At that point, we had already had PS2s and stuff. I would probably say the games that were like most interesting or influential to me from the beginning were arcade games and rhythm games. Um, we had, and I still have on my shelf, my PS2 copy of Namco Museum, which is a pretty long running series of arcade compilations from Namco. And so that was your Pac-Man, that was your Galaga and Galaxian and Pole Position, Dig Dug, and then there were a couple of arrangement versions, which were like in the 90s. The whole big thing was taking arcade games and updating them to either have 3D graphics or power ups, and they would change stuff up. And eh, sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But I thought these things were pretty cool, and so I played that a lot. And I'm surprised my disc still works. It's one of the blue bottom CDs, and it's pretty well scratched at this point. And it's not really that special anyway because there's not like the actual museum component. When the series started on the PS1, there was a literal museum you could go and look at stuff in the game, but they got rid of that for the vast majority of the Namco Museum games. It's kind of goofy, but so I still have that, and also, uh, YouTube was just getting big when I was starting to become 6, 7, 8, 9. So I was a really early adopter of YouTube, and there was a ton of retro gaming content from uh, probably my favorite channel at that point was Classic Game Room, and I fell in love with his style. It wasn't AVGN was around at that point. I watched a little bit of AVGN. I watched some of the kind of AVGN clones. I'm not saying they were great, but you watch a lot of dumb shit as a kid, so it's all right. But um, my favorite was pretty much Mark from Classic Game Room because he was just so he just
He's so
he wasn't he
chill.
didn't sound he didn't yeah he wasn't playing a character. I appreciated that. he was just kind of like, all these games are so cool, and he just wanted to talk about them and talk about beer and whatever. And I'm like, hey, that's good with me. And he's talking about all of these old games from the Atari and the Nintendo and all this other stuff. And this was before the big retro gaming bubble that we're experiencing now happened, where you could still theoretically get a Nintendo plus a bunch of games for 40-50 bucks. And so I had a bunch of those consoles. Kind of fallen off of it at this point. I don't find a lot of them necessarily super appealing, just because they're kind of meant to be intentionally difficult to artificially extend out the game runtime. But I love arcade games, just uh, do, and then also rhythm games, which are fairly similar to arcade games. And in fact, rhythm games started in the arcades. Where another big thing on early YouTube was Guitar Hero. I would go on there and I would see people doing FCs of songs before the whole big thing was. Uh, Also making sure that your score was maximized. So it was literally just about just standard runs that people would capture on like VHS or whatever of them playing Guitar Hero or whatever, and also modding these games.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's yeah, modding
That
is a
was it.
pretty interesting thing for as far as consoles go. Because it
Yeah,
wasn't really common back then.
yeah. It
Um,
was. It's curious to me because a lot of games, modding them as console games. I've tried ripping files from these from games occasionally, and a lot of the time it's not really a matter of uh, specific files. You go into, say you're modding Morrowind or something on PC, you can go in and the sounds for the game, all of the music, all of the dialogue and stuff, they're just MP3s. They're just loose files, and you can replace them. Modding is easy. Whereas on a console, I've noticed a lot of the time they tend to store their files in gigantic, uh, they're amount to tarballs, basically, if you're familiar with Linux, where it's just a big blob of files, and so it's not really as easy as you could just drop in a file, and you also have to worry about rebuilding the disk because of course they didn't want you just running random DVDRs of games or whatever. So there's a method that you have to, at least for the PS1 and PS2, where you have to rebuild the disk in a specific way and get a certain specific type of information in the disk image, and it's very much a big process. But out of all the games, Guitar Hero seems to have actually done something with that, and there became a console modding scene, and it happened. I remember a lot of videos of the one of the first Guitar Hero 2 demos. People would constantly use that because if you didn't plug in a controller, the game would play itself. So I remember seeing probably the earliest example of, or earliest examples of songs that were meant to be intentionally difficult, to the point where we could ever play them, came from Guitar Hero 2, and they would take advantage of. They called it a glitch at the time. It's just functionality where if you don't have a guitar, it'll play itself.
yeah, the um,
Charts.
I don't know if you're familiar with Beat Mania. Like, I'm surprised there hasn't been anything done with it because that's a pretty popular rhythm game on PS2, and I've had like talks about this before, but like, how come somebody hasn't like gone ahead and done like something like that with Beatmania, where you inject songs into like an existing game? But it's
A
just
lot
kind of
of, well,
surprising.
I think I'm not terribly familiar with Beatmania, but is there a PC clone of it?
There is. It's let's see. There's been several. So like one of the earliest ones would be called. It would. I think it's called a BM 95. I'd have to reference it or cross reference it, and then there's also a follow up called LR2 is the popular abbreviation, and it's a Lunatic Rave 2.
All right, so
And
yeah, so that's probably a big reason why there hasn't been like a scene for modding the console version specifically is when you have a PC clone that offers a very similar, or at least in the ballpark similar experience, you'd rather go with that because it's a lot easier. At least even with the tools and the knowledge that we have for Guitar Hero, um, it's still occasionally not exactly easy. Especially if we're writing new functionality. Like for example, I worked on Guitar Hero 2 Deluxe, which was a huge mod that came out in the community and enabled song speed ups, focus mode. It patched out the strum limit so people could play really fast songs without the game eating their strums. Uh, all of these nice quality of life upgrades, and occasionally it was a nightmare to put together. Even though we have debug functionality, we can see why the game doesn't like whatever we're doing. Even though we have tools to encode audio, tools to as quickly as possible rebuild the game, it's still a little bit idiosyncratic. So yeah, I'm not really surprised that people wouldn't take to modding console games. If you don't have to, it's probably a good idea not to. And that's one of the easier engines. That's the thing. Guitar Hero is one of the easier engines. I've seen some real nasty stuff in my time of modding PS2 games.
Yeah, so what motivated you to get started on your Guitar Hero 2 project?
Well, I've been so continuing on with the story that I had earlier. I would see all of these custom charts and stuff that people made, and I was really jealous of them because PS2 modding was around, but it was in its infancy. And I mean specifically the console itself, like mod chips and things running unsigned code. That was not as easy as it is today. So we had a slimline PlayStation, and I don't think MC Boot was a thing yet. So as a result, getting the game to run basically still required you to have a mod chip literally soldered into your PS2, and then you put the disc in, you put in your burned DVD-R or whatever, and you could run the game. I didn't have anything like that, so I just kind of, and I was a little kid, and so as a result, and nobody around me was into this stuff, so I didn't have any access to all of that crazy stuff. But I finally started to have access to it when came back to the game a couple of years later. I was like 13, 14, playing the game all the time, and I was like, I feel like I could actually mod this now. So uh, I don't remember what was my initial motivating factor for starting work on Guitar Hero 2. I would say maybe trying to rip all the songs from the game because I've been interested in because there's a lot of good music in these games. Harmonix is absolutely kick ass at curating a soundtrack, so they will uh, have all of these obscure songs or whatever, and I'm like, well, I want to just listen to them. I don't want to play the game to listen to them. I want to just listen to them on my iPod or whatever. So I think that might have been the first reason why I opened up the game files in the first place was to say, well, maybe I could mix this stuff down on my own because I was already kind of an audio geek even as a teenager, and so that became my introduction to ripping the files from the game, and then it was pretty much an A to Z process of actually trying to get charts into it and making my own songs. And by this point, much better tools had come around. Um, so I just kind of went with it from there. And then, of course, last year when all of the Guitar Hero 2 leaks happened with Project Deluge, which if you follow Hidden Palace, you probably remember that. Um, we got some Guitar Hero demos through it, and all of the Guitar Hero demos that we got through Deluge contained debugging functionality, which meant, you know, the burgeoning Milo Hacks modding scene, which had been around for a couple years, but it was kind of hard to do anything crazy with it. Suddenly, now we could build this special debug version of the game and do way more with it. So if something crashed, we didn't just get a TLB miss spam in PCSX2 and didn't know what was going on. Now we could see specifically, oh, okay, I didn't close an array, or okay, there's a type mismatch or something, and it made debugging way easier. So then there's this gigantic gold rush to do Guitar Hero 2 Deluxe and then Rock Band 2 Deluxe, although Rock Band doesn't have any debugging stuff, unfortunately. Um, and by that point, I was also a lot more prolific with my customs, so I officially started doing what I call Marf GH, which is an idea for putting together as close to a vanilla quality Harmonix quality set list as possible with separated instruments and all difficulties for charts, guitar, bass, the stage animations, trying to make it as legit as possible. and I've gotten a whole ton of interest on it, and it's definitely an ongoing thing, even though I'm not currently working on it.
So I think you've had two releases so far, right? Or am I missing another one?
So yeah, well, so as far as Marf GH goes, uh, I have the first one that I put out was I think in May or June of last year, and Guitar Hero 2 Deluxe had come out, and the idea itself for Marf GH had dated back to 2018 or 2019 when I realized like I still want to make some kind of big gigantic custom disc, and I just never had any luck with it. I had been trying since like I said I was 14. I was like, well, maybe I could do customs now, and I did a little DVD-R of like ported Rock Band stuff and maybe some customs, but it was garbage. It was hot garbage. And so that never got released or anything. And then I came back to the idea of it. But now the Guitar Hero 2 Deluxe had come out, and suddenly there was like an official disc because people had been coming up with ideas for discs, but nothing ever got finished. For the first couple of years of Milo Hax's existence, nothing ever got finished. It was always like, here's a little, alpha version of this disc that I'm working on, and somebody would post it to their Google Drive or their MediaFire or whatever, and it would stay in the Discord server, and that was it. And uh, it it was just there was nothing finished. There was nothing really to be proud of. And then Guitar Hero 2 Deluxe comes and it blows everything out of the water, and it's like an official. It's like a new game. It's like a remaster. Because people, for whatever strange reason, constantly claim, "Oh, I want to play Guitar Hero on my PS5." I don't care, whatever. But it was like a new game, and so suddenly it felt legit. Guitar Hero 2 was like, oh, there's a legit scene around this now. So I grabbed the first 10 songs I could think of, stuff that I had just recently worked on or stuff that I really liked that I had sitting around. And I put together a disc of 10 songs, and I called it Volume 0 because it really was not the start of Marv GH. It was really just like here's how this is going to be. This is a glorified sampler platter. And I used one of the alpha builds that we had for Guitar Hero Deluxe 2.0, which came out, I want to say, 4 or 5 months later. So I used that. I put some songs on it, put it out, and folks really liked it. And it's funny because I see that disc now, and I'm like, there's some stuff I really don't like about it. There's some charting errors, all this, but folks were really into it. And so the idea was, rather than trying to create that gigantic set list now and it never coming out and me burning out on it, instead I would go ahead and put together these smaller discs. So, like I said, 10 songs on Volume 0, and then the next one is going to be Volume 1, the official start of things, and that is I'm aiming for June of 2022 for the release of that, and that'll just be a nice mix of, there's going to be some Guitar Hero 3 stuff in there, some recharts, some ports from Amplitude, which is another harmonics game that everybody should play, some customs. There's again some stuff that I took like raw multi tracks and mixed them down myself. So it's going to be a nice mix of old favorites, stuff that's never been in a Guitar Hero game, but people are uh, fond of it. You think of like one of the songs is going to be Ventura Highway by America, which is this lovely. It kind of reminds me of Crazy on You by Heart, which is in the second game. And that's really nice. That chart's already finished. That'll be in Volume 1. Like I said, there's going to be some Guitar Hero 3 stuff. Some of it's just a direct port. Some of it's going to be a rechart. But the idea is to go with 4 or 5 of these volume sets and then compile all of the best songs and put together that final gigantic 30 to 64 song set list. But yeah, there's only one currently.
Okay, so let's see for the casual person. Uh, is there any advantage of playing Guitar Hero 2 Deluxe over Clone Hero, or is it just like total preference?
They're they're very much different games. If you look at them both, you're not going to immediately tell the difference. But if you play them both, you're going to feel the difference. The thing about Clone Hero and the thing about all Guitar Hero clones, so Frets on Fire or Phase Shift, all of which I've done my respective time on, is that they're not meant to be full on accurate recreations of specific engines. So in Clone Hero's case, it's meant to be somewhat similar to a bunch of Neversoft engines. So there's the infinite front end of Guitar Hero 3, which basically means that you don't, if you're playing a hammer-on or a pull-off, you don't have to wait until that note hits the smashers, which are the 5 targets at the bottom. You don't have to wait. You can just hit it, and it'll act like you hit that note. Um, it's kind of goofy. So Clone Hero simulates that, and I've heard that it's very similar to Warriors of Rock, with the frame limiter turned off. So it's a mishmash of Neversoft engines, and it's meant for songs that are faster and more difficult, and it's certainly valid in its own right. But it's not at all like a Milo engine where things are a lot tighter. And in the case of Guitar Hero 2, it's right in that sweet spot where the visual feedback of the engine I feel is great. It a lot of people have problems with the hammer-ons and pull-offs in Guitar Hero 1, so they pulled back how tight that engine is a little bit, and they made it so you don't have to do the thing where you hold down the button and then press the next button to do the hammer-on. You just press the next button. So they made it a whole lot easier, but it still has that tight feel. I hear this a lot. I hear from people where they say, "I've never hit something that I felt I should have missed on a Milo engine, as opposed to something on Guitar Hero 3 where you have such a wide window to hit notes that occasionally it feels like the game is just giving you it, even though you very blatantly did not hit the notes correctly." Or in the case of Clone Hero, like Clone Hero, for example, allows for spamming, where you just press random buttons and it'll hit the notes, so long as you've matched that basic concept of I pressed the green button when there's a green note. You could just spam whatever. You cannot spam in a Milo engine. If you try to just flail on the controller while you're playing Guitar Hero 2, it is not going to recognize your inputs. It's going to ignore you, and you're gonna fail out of the song. So it's a lot less forgiving, and that makes it sound like it's going to be more difficult. And it is technically if you come from Clone Hero, you come from Guitar Hero 3, but it's a lot more rewarding to hit stuff in a Milo engine. If you ask any of the streamers who play multiple games, or you ask the old heads, a lot of them have a real strong fondness for Guitar Hero 2 because, like I said, it's just that sweet spot of it feels just tight enough, but it's not unfair. Everything works as it should. The visual feedback is really good. I've heard complaints, and I kind of have them myself about Rock Band, where um, there's no flames when you hit a note. There's no flames. The notes shatter, and it's not as satisfying a visual effect as the flames that when you hit a note in Guitar Hero. So it's just this perfect sweet spot. And every other engine I play on, for example, Frequency or Amplitude, which are earlier harmonics games, so they're still running on Milo, but they're not Guitar Hero. And when I play them, sometimes the game will eat some of my inputs, or the time you have to hit the notes is going to be so crazy tight that it just feels broken. It feels unfair. Um, and there's nothing like that in Guitar Hero. So for people who are kind of casual players, they're not going to care. They just want to have something that feels like Guitar Hero, and Clone Hero does that perfectly well. Um, but Guitar Hero 2, if you're really into the game, you probably have a pretty strong fondness for it just because of how good it feels to play on.
Yeah, and then there's there's like a bunch of things with preferences where somebody is already familiar, and Clone Hero is like easy to distribute, so it's probably more popular for people to like put songs out for it, right? And then there's
Yeah, it's a lot easier to get customs into Clone Hero because you're literally just dropping a song in a folder and calling it a day. And then also, if you're used to a specific engine and you try to move to another one, the difference in how both of those engines feel to play is going to massively impact how you feel you're doing. So, as an example, if you play a lot of Milo and you go to Clone Hero, shit feels free. It doesn't feel like it takes any effort at all. Whereas if you're used to Clone Hero and you go to Guitar Hero 2, you're probably going to be like, this game sucks, I can't hit anything, because you're so used to having like a good dozens of milliseconds window to hit notes, whereas Milo is a whole lot tighter. So it all depends on preference, but they are very, very different feeling engines. And I really would say that if somebody's into Clone Hero, they should give it Guitar Hero 2 a shot at some point, just to see that the stuff that people do in Clone Hero now is occasionally very much not possible on Milo. And so, however you look at it, either Milo is a much more tighter engine that people can't cheat, or Clone Hero is a major improvement that isn't as difficult to get into. So, just again, it's preference, depends how you look at it.
Okay, and now is there a optimal Guitar Hero 2 Deluxe setup you recommend or people should aim for?
What do you mean?
Because Guitar Hero 2 Deluxe is for PS2, right?
Yes, it's a PS2 mod.
Are there any people playing it on the PCSX2 or on
Yes,
PS2's?
that's actually a pretty
Okay.
popular way to play it because Guitar Hero 2 is a very, very light game to emulate. There's scant occasionally in the venues. Some of the venues will have problems on PCSX2. Ironically enough, um, what's his name? I think his name was Mizkif, something like that. Well, there was a bigger streamer outside of our sphere who tried to play Guitar Hero 2 Deluxe at some point, and he was having serious performance issues playing the game. And it makes it look like Guitar Hero 2 or Guitar Hero 2 Deluxe is the problem, but the fact is that uh, some of the optimization stuff that Harmonix did with the venues is occasionally not very, because of course if you've played Guitar Hero 2, you know that there are 8 venues that you can play in. There's um, we call them internally battle, small one, small two, big, theater, fest, arena, and then stone, which goes from the battle of the bands to the smaller clubs, big club, theater, the Warp Tour, the Harmonix Arena, and then Stonehenge. So just as a shorthand, if I refer to it as battle, you know what I mean. But for example, battle is horribly optimized. So on a real PS2, it's fine enough, but PCSX2, for whatever reason, will stutter like hell on this venue. And in that sense, one of the nicest things that we added was focus mode, which turns off the world rendering. So you're not having those slowdowns, or at least not as much. Um, but in most venues, the game runs flawlessly, even on substandard hardware. Like I'm talking to you right now, and the computer that I use to mod the game is a very, very old iMac. And so we're talking like a laptop grade GPU, and it's from 2014 or so. So this thing is not playing Doom 2016 on high settings. But it runs the game well on PCSX2. I can get a lot of the time, if I turn the frame limiter off, I can get 120 to 180 FPS. So if anybody's actually running it on a computer that's meant for gaming, it's going to run flawlessly. And so I do see a lot of people modding the game and playing the game on PCSX2 because it does emulate really well. So, but as far as the optimal experience, I mean, you really can't argue with hardware, and there's always going to be improvements in trying to get the hardware side of things for custom code, like modding your PS2. It's always going to get a little bit better. Like I was talking about back in 07, 08, it was a mod chip or nothing. Whereas nowadays we have, of course, free MC boot, which is an exploit that you put on a memory card, and then you just boot your PS2 and you can run whatever you want on it. Or there's free DVD loader now, which means you can take any disk image, and as long as the PS2 is exploitable, it uses, I think, the DVD player as a way to get custom code running. So there's infinitely easier ways to get Guitar Hero 2 Deluxe on real hardware if somebody wants it. And of course, nothing beats the tried and true. You get a big old fat PS2 with the hard drive slot, and you can throw an adapter and just a generic IDE hard drive at it, and you get Guitar Hero 2 Deluxe on it, and it'll run it forever, even if your disk drive is fried. So
Yeah. So are there any noticeable advantages of playing it on hardware? Maybe with a CRT display.
yeah, that's actually another reason why you would want to play it on hardware is if you're using a CRT, you're not going to get any input lag. Whereas, and this is one of the things that people have constantly complained about Deluxe, and it's something that we can't fix because Deluxe is a script mod where we're just going into the game scripts and changing stuff about them. So either exposing engine features and hooks, or custom menus or whatever. It's all functionality that was already in the game. We're just exposing it so that way people can make use of it. So, for example, turning the world rendering off. Uh, that was in Guitar Hero in the first place. We didn't add in turning off the world. We just made it so you could check a box and turn off the world. But if we wanted to change the lag calibration, which Guitar Hero 2 has, that would require us to write custom engine code, which is not something that we can do. Because the PS2, if you know anything about it internally, is it uses a custom chip called the Emotion Engine, and it runs off of MIPS. So you would need to not only be familiar with being able to disassemble an executable and read through the disassembly, but you would also need to be familiar with the way that a MIPS processor works. And in some cases, people are able to pull stuff off. We had a guy on our team for a 1.0 called Generic Mad Scientist. He's mostly into Clone Hero. But he was our quote-unquote code guy. He was the guy who figured out how to patch the strum limit in the first place. His way of doing it was to take PCSX2 and use the debugger to be able to determine on which instruction the game does something. So, as an example, with the strum limit, I know I'm getting way off track. CRT.
No worries.
This, to answer your question, yes, the CRT, you're not going to get any input lag. We cannot fix people having input lag problems, which happens on emulator. It happens on... The best solution that we found is that there's our way of inserting customs into the game, Onyx, which is the easiest way to do it. It's not the way I do it, but it's the way that I think people should do it, because it's just foolproof. You can import Clone Hero songs or whatever into Guitar Hero 2, and you're golden. That allows you to set an audio delay, so it'll literally take like 80 milliseconds of silence and put it at the start of your audio, so that way it compensates for the video lag. It feels correct. We can't fix that ourselves just in the game itself. That's not what Deluxe is for. But you can do it by baking it into your audio, which sucks because then you have 80 milliseconds of lag in your audio. So if you're playing it on a CRT, you know. But yeah, Deluxe is interesting. It's not. You really have to understand a little bit of how Guitar Hero 2 works internally, where it's not just code. It is all code because it is all telling a computer what to do. But there's two different kinds of code. There's the executable itself, which is something that we can't edit. So that's where you would write a new lag calibration routine, or where we patched out the strum limit, where the game will literally wait a certain amount of time each frame, and if it detects two strums within that time period, it's just going to ignore the second one. That's the strum limit, quote unquote. But if we make it not wait, which is just killing one of the instructions, then we could just strum as fast as we want. And that's something Guitar Hero 2 Deluxe did. But anything more complicated than that is not within our forte. Most of what we did was through scripts. So the game had a scripting engine called Data Array, and when you disassembled all of the scripts in the game, they're in a kind of a Lisp-like format. If you're familiar with Lisp, it's a programming language that's a little bit funky. It's a very symbol-driven, a lot of parentheses, a lot of like operands come first. It doesn't look like traditional like JavaScript or something. It doesn't look like a traditional programming language, but it's very, very efficient. And it's and Harmonix, around the time of Amplitude, because they didn't like how Python ran on the PS2. Originally, they were using Python as their scripting language back in 2001. They were way ahead of the curve. But that shit didn't run particularly well on 32 megabytes of RAM. So they wrote their own scripting language called Data Array. And there's a really cool archive talk from Eric Malafew, I think, where he went to GDC and talked about their custom scripting language. And I think the entire DTA parser, data array parser, takes up like 3 megabytes maybe of memory. I don't know. I don't think that's true at all. But the point is, it ran faster and it ran smaller in memory than Python did. So Harmonix used it up until, I think they might still use a version for Rock Band 4. I know Rock Band 3 uses it. I know that all the Rock, like I said, all the Rockman games, all of the Harmonix made Karaoke Revolution games use it. Amplitude uses it, and of course Guitar Hero. Um, we can edit that stuff. We can write custom data array, and we wrote a lot of it for Deluxe. So it's the difference between if you're familiar with Gary's mod uses Lua. We can imagine you can't edit anything with Gary's mod at all, but you can edit the Lua files for Gary's mod. So if you wanted to write custom weapons or whatever, you could. That's where we operated. We wrote custom scripts for it, and that allowed us to like I was saying, expose engine functionality. Like for example, turning off the world rendering or song speed ups uh, are done by running the beat matcher fast, and we can put a multiplier on the beat matcher, and it's a function. It's basically tricking the engine, but the functionality was already there. We just wrote a way for you to be able to manipulate that in the game itself. So that's why some of the stuff that people wanted for Deluxe, like a better way to calibrate audio, that didn't happen because it's just not within our purview. Or for example, people wanted us to put in open notes. There's open notes in Clone Hero or tap notes. We can't do that. It would require us to make changes to the way that the game reads MIDI data, which we can do a little bit. We can't really change the MIDI parser itself. So yeah, if you're wanting a truly lag-free experience, CRT on a real PS2 is the way to go. But as far as playing rhythm games on an emulator goes, I've gotten well used to Guitar Hero 2. It feels perfectly fine, and I know a lot of people play it that way too.
Yeah, and that's fair because not everybody is gonna want to like get a dedicated CRT setup for their PS2. I know most people have already like just settled with a the LCD display or whatever, just because of the space it takes to like set up all that stuff.
Yeah, and I'm gonna be honest. I don't actually own a CRT. The display that I have my PS2 hooked up to is a very very old HD TV to the point where they still had the this thing has like S video on it, so it's very very early on. If you get like a modern LCD TV, they don't have that kind of stuff anymore. But
Yeah,
mine has all the hookups, and it's a nice display. I hope to keep it for as long as it stays alive. But I don't own a CRT myself, so I don't blame people for not having one.
yeah, especially because CRTs are in kind of market boom where even a really cheap RF set is going for hundreds of dollars and it's ridiculous. So don't get discouraged for not getting a lag free setup, but still
Yeah,
keep an eye out.
I think retro gaming at this point is a total bubble. It's total garbage. I'm not particularly fond of. Like I said, I got into retro gaming before it was a big thing. I know that's a pretty hipster thing to say, but I was just a little kid excited about. Oh, cool, Nintendo! I can play, with this ridiculous metal joystick, and it was cool. Um, but nowadays, I see so many. Like I still look for PS2 games because that's my personal favorite era in gaming. PS1, PS2, that's where I feel comfortable. Doesn't matter the console. I like GameCube, although GameCube games, fuck that. You're not going to find them at a decent price ever. Especially if they're like Mario games, it's not happening. Um, the original Xbox is really cool. PC, I would like to get some more PC games from that era, and I have under my desk a Windows XP box that I'd like to throw in a graphics card and maybe a sound card and uh, some more RAM and turn it into a box for running like I said early 2000s PC games. I love that era, and the prices that I see for games from this era are absurd. The concept of getting I think the last time I checked for a copy of Amplitude 2003 into the PS2 version, as opposed to the PS3, PS4 version, which was a remake. Um, I think I saw it going for like 45, $50, complete in box. That's not happening.
Oh
That's
boy.
like as much as it was when it was new for a used copy of it for a game that nobody ever bought. Like, are you out of your mind? Or I will see there's that tends to be a pretty similar story. I remember seeing. Oh yeah, that was it. That was the one I was thinking of. Need for Speed Underground 2. That game is going for like 65, $70 on eBay, complete. I don't think that's happening.
I mean,
And it's just,
that's
yeah.
if it's complete, that's kind of fair because
No,
considering
that's
the
not fair. That is
prices.
not fair at all. If you pay more than $15, $20 for a complete game, you are a
Like,
hack.
yeah, like if you're collecting, like for purposes of collecting, it's a slightly fair. It's just not fair to people that are just interested in playing the game, and I
I
think
don't
that's
I
why.
don't I don't This is unpopular opinion. I am not fond of people who buy games just to put them on a shelf.
Me
I want to
neither.
buy a game because I want to play that game. That's why I want a copy of Amplitude. That's why I want to get a copy of Need for Speed Underground 2. I was playing through it, really liked it. I love Amplitude. It's honestly, if you are into Guitar Hero, you should play Amplitude. It is fantastic, and nobody's ever heard of it, and they all laugh at it. That's the funny thing is that whenever I'm really excited about it, people go, "What is this nonsense? Amplitude? I've never heard of it." And then they play it and they get it, and they're like, "What? This? How have I never played this before?" And if you like Rock Band Blitz, Amplitude is the same concept. But anyway, uh,
Yeah,
but I see these games going for absurd prices that they just are not worth.
yeah,
I
that's a like a
Yeah,
that's one of the things that sucks about retro gaming right now, and I think it's very important that we have options like emulating, let's see, jailbreaking your console for lack of a better term.
yeah,
Like using optical disc emulators or like for PS2 right now, it's super easy to get a PS2 hack. Just buy like an $8 memory card, which comes with
yeah.
a free memory boot, and if you have the fat console, as we mentioned before, just buy a hard drive and just load it up with games. Dreamcast,
Yeah.
it's gotten much easier as well. There's a an optical disc emulator that you replace the real optical disc reader with, and it just put an SD card and that's it.
And
There's
that kind of stuff I very much appreciate because the idea of having to pay this much to play a game on real hardware, uh, uh, you know, accurately, the way that it was meant to be played, is absurd. The fact is that these are old games. People don't realize the age of these games. Um, Amplitude 2003, that's turning 20 in a year.
whoa.
And the idea that it would go for as much as a new game, even though it hasn't been in print for however long, and it's not in demand either, because nobody's ever heard of it. I talk to a lot of people who play rhythm games. They've never heard of it, and you want me to believe that it goes for $50 on Amazon? I don't believe you for a second, because it's a scalper's market. And that's all that the whole idea of I'm going to collect a bunch of these games, so I put them on a shelf. Uh, that's a scalper's market. That is somebody who is looking to rip people off. And I'm very, very glad that there are ways that you can take a disc image and play it on a real console now because otherwise these consoles would be pretty much useless unless you just happen to find, a copy of this game for super cheap. And I'm certainly looking into it. I'd like to get one of those IDE adapters so you can just use any random computer hard drive. I was also hearing of a thing that Janak, who also worked on Guitar Hero 2 Deluxe, he worked on Rockman 2 Deluxe. He's great. Um, just he does. I don't know how he does some of the stuff that he does. It's just for fun basically. But anyway, uh, he is a big avid retro console guy too, and he was playing around with something called Retro NAS, which is a thing that you put on a Raspberry Pi or something, and you can load your games over the network. And to be perfectly honest, network booting a PS2 has always been feasible, but it's not great because modern, the software that, like, I think it's through OPL. I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that. But the software that you run on the PS2 to load a game over the network uses a very old version of SMB, which is the network sharing protocol. And older, uh, newer computers, they don't work on that protocol anymore. They turn it off for security reasons, quote unquote security, whatever. Um, And what RetroNAS does is it on the computer side of things, the actual file serving side of things, it just makes that super efficient. You just install it and you give it your ROMs or whatever, and then you plug the Ethernet out on your Raspberry Pi into your PS2, and you load games that way over USB or micro SD or whatever it is, and it's a much more efficient way to network boot. So that's what I was saying earlier, that there's always going to be these different ways and these easier ways of like uh, putting new software and games and stuff, disk images, and just running whatever you want on your PS2. It's only going to get easier. Um, you look at for example, the Wii uh, community for an example of that. In my friend group server the other day, somebody linked a thread on GBA Temp about the idea of running games off the SD card, and the Wii does support gigantic 128 gig SD cards. You could fit, or 256, you fit like 32 64 games on your SD card. You just put that in the front of your Wii. You don't even need a hard drive. You just boot the games off that, and it runs pretty well. Like, this stuff is getting easier, and I'm very, very glad, because the actual price for the games themselves are not going down anytime soon, and I'm very much waiting for the day that this stuff stops being desirable, because I'm fine if it's like people actually want to play a game, so they buy the game. I'm fine if there's actual organic demand for it, but there's not organic demand for it. Some of these games are highly obscure sports titles, and they still go for a gigantic amount. And I refuse to believe that anybody's actually paying for it. So
Right. Yeah, because I think it's being able to play the game without the official commercial disc is a side effect of trying to preserve the games, because I think that's a more important part, preserving the access to the game and being able to play it on the original hardware.
yeah, yeah. I mean, the
Because yeah,
whole
it's kind of a weird thing, because like emulating the game's not always gonna like feel the same, because there's always going to be
the thing
like
mostly is that I always kind of laugh a little when I hear the concept of preservation. Because yeah, it's true. That is what you're doing. You're making sure that anybody can get a hold of these random, like for example, demo discs, or the setup utility for the DVD player or whatever. So that it is true. But to be perfectly honest, it is technically pirating games.
ninety
Not that I
percent.
care, but I find it funny because people try to make it out to sound like such a noble thing. It's like, no, you really want to play a bunch of games for free, and I totally understand it. I'm cool with it, but like, it's not really the noble pursuit of I'm building the Library of Alexandria for PlayStation. It's like, who are you fooling?
Right? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like I'm not pretending that, oh, like this is the point of this. It's just like, oh,
Yeah,
it's I just
yeah,
think
no.
it's important.
Ultimately, it is important. Yeah, it's important for somebody other than me. I think I don't particularly like to hoard data, because when I hoard data, it usually means I lose it at the end of the day. I've already had it happen. Whenever I would try to collect something, as a good example, I used to have what I called a stem bank, and if you're familiar with audio production in any kind of way, stems are the mixed and rendered instrument parts in a song. So you get drums, or you get different uh, guitar parts or whatever, and those are called stems. And a big place to get these stems are from rhythm games, because of course if you miss a note or you stop playing or whatever, the instrument will drop out of the mix with the intent of making you feel like you're actually playing the guitar part or whatever instrument that you're playing. So I used to rip these all the time from games, and then I lost it all, and I had like a good 80 gigs worth of this stuff, and I
Oh
lost it
man.
all. And that was a couple of years ago, because the external hard drive I had it on, I didn't keep copies of it or anything, but the external I had it on just kind of up and died, and so that sucked. And only recently have I started putting together something better, and thankfully we have a lot better now. I'm not relying on, for example, back in 2014, 2015, when I was actually putting together my original stem bank. Um, a lot of that was from log spots and just weird download sites and stuff like that. So it wasn't great. It wasn't a you didn't really know the lineage of where it came from, which is important. If you take an MP3 and you re-encode it to MP3, it's going to sound worse because of the way that lossy audio works. So I like to have a pristine copy ripped directly from the game if possible, and thankfully we have tools to do that now. So there was a big thing late last year where um, the folks behind C3 Tools, C3 Con Tools, which is a utility that's a bunch of smaller utilities for manipulating Rock Band DLC, and they found out that there was hidden functionality in this program that let us decrypt. They're called MOGs, and that's because they are multi-track OGs. The audio for Rock Band is in Vorbis format, and Harmonix wrote a custom version of it where there's a like a custom seek table and some encryption at the start of the file to prevent random people getting access to the what is essentially the masters of famous songs, because of course that means the bands wouldn't want to license their music to Rock Band, and we didn't have a way to decrypt any of this stuff. But it turns out someone came to us privately and they said, "Hey, the decryption keys for actually accessing this functionality, C3 Controls is written in .NET, which is Microsoft's I don't want to call it an API. I don't really. I think it's like a programming framework is basically what it is. And it's not particularly difficult if you know what you're doing to peel open a .NET program and see what's inside. And so the keys to access this functionality were hidden inside the public build of C3 Contools. They didn't do the smart thing and distribute like a version of C3 Contools to just the people who wanted it, just the people who could be trusted with the decryption for audio. It just hid it in the public build, and everybody got the public build. So when somebody found these, we were now suddenly able to decrypt everything up to and including Rock Band 4 on disk. So that meant Rock Band 1, Rock Band 1 and 2 DLC, Rock Band 2, Lego Rock Band 3, and then Rock Band 4 on disk. Not Rock Band 4 DLC, but the on disk stuff we can. And that was all put together by Maxton, who was one of the really brilliant coding minds of the community, and unfortunately died last year. And so his work was hidden in this program, and somebody came forth and was like, here's how you can access it. And we sat on it for about a month before we're like, should we really be keeping this to ourselves? Like, that was kind of the whole thing that we hated in the first place, was people keeping all of this obscure modding stuff to ourselves. We wanted it preserved. We wanted it out there. And so JNAC finally said, fuck it, and just posted it in Milo Hacks directly. And it caused some pretty massive tidal waves of really irritated people. Even though this finally gave us access to, for example, Rock Band Network, which is thousands of songs that were charted by the community of tons of obscure music, and then sold as like it was official DLC. A lot of those songs had never been ripped. So we just we didn't have access to them. You could download the DLC files and play them in real Rock Band, but if you wanted access to the files, you were out of luck. But suddenly now we were able to decrypt and access all of those songs. So there was a huge issue that people had with it, where suddenly they weren't allowed to gatekeep all of, this important functionality because I don't know, they expected Harmonix, or now Epic Games because they now own Harmonix.
Oh wow.
To give a shit. They expected them to particularly care that, like, hey, look, some decryption tools for your old games are now floating around online in an obscure Discord with like 400 people in it. Oh boy, and surprise, surprise, nothing has ever happened legally. They don't care. But we finally got access to all of that stuff, and I don't know where I was going with that necessarily. I don't know where that started. I got off on a tangent, but
no worries, no worries. So let's see. To get back on track, earlier you mentioned stems and stuff. You know how like there's a track
that was it. That was it.
instruments?
I was building them all from. I was building my new stem bank from just decrypted audio, from like freshly, not like Clone Hero rips or anything, just fresh game audio. So I have I have a version of that now. But anyway, yes, as you were saying, stems. What about it?
Okay, so like I don't know how familiar you are with Beat Mania. So that
Right.
whole game, uh, the way it works is that there's one background track, but every note is a sound. So you, as you play the game, you construct the song by hitting each key. So I don't know if that's similar to how Guitar Hero's been doing it, because
Well, I mean, I don't know for sure because it's just you telling me it. But as far as the way Guitar Hero goes, Guitar Hero Rock Band, they have, like I said, they were stems. So it's just the isolated guitar part or the isolated vocal part, and these things can be muted in the mix separately. So that way, if you stop playing the guitar part or the bass part, only that drops out. The rest of the song is still there. So it's like the bassist stopped playing. And it's just a single audio track basically, and that's the way Guitar Hero works as well. Although the amount of separation depends on the engine. So for Guitar Hero 1, there is no separated bass track. It is simply band and then separated guitar. Guitar Hero 2, there's now bass, so there's now separated band, which is generally drums, vocals, keys, and other guitars, then separated guitar and separated bass. And then for Rock Band, there's between 1 and 3 tracks for drums. So you have kick, snare, else, or maybe it's just kick, else, or it's just one drum stream. So 1 to 3 stems for drums, a separated guitar, separated bass, separated vocals, and then an other track, which again, like I said, for older songs that tends to be keys, that tends to be backing vocals, um, and that differs a little bit from. I don't know if this is closer to how Beatmania does it, but Amplitude, uh, they touted this in the marketing materials for Amplitude as well, where uh, all of the stems they were still using stems, but they were chopped up into samples. And the whole idea was that Amplitude features a remix mode that you could go into and reprogram the song's drums or reprogram the bass line or whatever, or the synth part. The So we actually need, like, for example, with Marf GH, I have some Amplitude songs. They're stored in sound banks. They're not stored as stems. They're stored as banks of samples. So as a result, I you need a program to reassemble all that stuff into usable stems, and that's what I had to do when I was getting, for example, Accelerator, which is a song from Frequency, which is pretty similar to Amplitude. When I was getting that into Marf GH Volume Zero, I had to basically reconstruct the entire song because it's literally just like, for example, each syllable of the vocals would be its own sample, and then it would just be the game would just put it back together. And so I don't know if that's closer to how Beatmania does it. I have no knowledge of Beatmania, but there are a couple of different ways that Harmonix music games tend to store their audio. Yeah.
yeah. So to give you a better visual example, so I sent you a screenshot, which I'll post in the live video once I upload it. So here's how the Beatmania tracks are structured. So like you mentioned, it could be chopped up samples, and then there's the instructions to construct them, and then as you play, you're gonna be hitting each sample on your keyboard. And I think
Okay,
that's
that sounds pretty similar to how Amplitude does it
yeah,
then. Yeah.
okay, yeah, that's cool. Okay, so yeah, so what are some other rhythm games you have experience with? Like, have you heard of Guitar Freaks?
Yeah, I've never played. If it came from the arcades, I've never played it. So I'm sure I've had the opportunity to play like DDR at some point. Never bothered. Um, I had a friend who was really trying to get me to play Parappa the Rapper. Never played it. I've obviously heard of it. I know the gist of it. Um, I think I tried Itaru Man at one point, which was an early PS2 rhythm game that Sony was really pushing. I don't know if that ever did numbers, but that was another kind of weird rhythm game simulating guitar kind of thing. Um, as far as other rhythm games go, uh, there's a couple on the PC side of things I like. Um, like I used to play a lot of Audio Surf. That's a really fun game, and I still will occasionally play it because I like the fact that you can use any song and generate a game level from it. And it kind of reminds me, and since that game was a success, it kind of reminds me of how hard Harmonix bungled the Amplitude remake, the one that they released for the PS3 and PS4, because if they gave up on the name, because the whole reason that it was PS3 exclusive, PS3 PS4 is because Sony still owned the trademark to Amplitude. The problem is that Harmonix could have just used a different name and then released it on whatever console they wanted to, including PC. Where I really honestly think the Amplitude remake would have done huge numbers because it's such a fun game. But unfortunately, they decided to keep it exclusive to these two consoles, and as a result, nobody's played it. And it also makes getting new songs in the game increasingly difficult. We still haven't exactly figured out everything that's going on. We do have customs, but there's certain parts of the game audio and stuff that we haven't quite figured out yet, or like venue controls and stuff were undocumented until a couple of months ago. So it's still pretty early days. And then Amplitude for the PS2, we just can't mod in the first place. The script format hasn't been figured out yet, and it's apparently pretty fucky. So all the people that are smart enough to have looked at it and went, no, thank you. And also, we don't have the ability to generate those sound banks. We have a program called Samplitude, which can, like I said, glue them all back together, glue all those samples back together into a coherent vocal track or whatever, but we can't generate one from pieces. So we can't generate a sound bank. So there's no customs for the original Amplitude. And so, unfortunately, outside of Guitar Hero and Rock Band, a lot of Milo games have gone pretty well neglected as far as their modding scenes go. So, of course, Guitar Hero 2 has never really gone away, and now it's huge again. Not really huge, but prominent if you're into rhythm games. Rock Band never really went away. There's still people doing Rock Band 3 stuff. Um, of course, Clone Hero is actually genuinely big. But you get to Amplitude or you get to Karaoke Revolution, which is where Rock Band got its vocal part from, another Harmonix game where you sing. The gameplay, the vocal gameplay in Karaoke Revolution is the same as the vocal gameplay in Rock Band. And I don't think anybody's ever attempted a Karaoke Revolution custom. I want to be that first person, but it just hasn't been a thing as far as I know. And so my interest in games tend to be if I can mod them or not. I obviously like playing them, but I also like the satisfaction of being able to change them myself. So if there's not really mod tools for a game, I tend to be a whole lot less interested in it. So, yeah, I don't know. I could probably play more rhythm games. Yeah.
Yeah. Like if I were to recommend one, it might be a bit of a setup. Definitely Beat Mania because you definitely need the dedicated controller. Um, but any other rhythm game, I guess you're already pretty much covered with Guitar Hero.
Yeah.
There's nothing much else out there. Cause like speaking about like guitar simulators, or I thought Rock Band would be one of those games that would last forever because of the way the presentation is, and then the DLC store is, and it's like I don't
Yeah.
know. And then but now we have customs. But speaking of modding games,
Yeah.
yeah, you want to guess where I'm gonna go with this?
Well, I still want you to introduce it anyway.
Okay, so you know, Quake is one of the first games that had that was like fully embraced by its developers to be moddable
Yeah.
from day one. Even though the modding tools were kind of they were still primitive at the time, people were still able to do some pretty cool stuff. There's people that went as far as releasing unofficial commercial discs with shitty maps on them, and
Yeah.
it's kind of crazy. So when was like when did you like get into Quake, the 1996 game, and
Yeah.
how did you get
So,
into modding it?
well, Quake is probably the first. In fact, I call them all Quake-like engines because they all work on a pretty similar idea of you build a map out of brushes, you place down entities, and then you compile the map. So there's a lot of engines like that. Quake is really the place where it started, but I didn't start with Quake. I started with the Source engine because my first real PC game was Team Fortress 2. And then I got into Gary's Mod, and I was really excited about the idea of being able to make my own levels. I played all of the Valve games for a long time. I played a lot of Counter-Strike Source. I really liked that one. I played CSGO until they introduced weapon skins, and I was like, no thank you. Well, I already own TF2. I don't need TF2. But now it's gritty and realistic. I see where this is going. I don't like their whole market nonsense that Valve likes to do. But CSGO was fun. Probably still is fun. I really liked uh, some of the Gold Source games. Ricochet was pretty fun. I did my time in. I played a little bit of Day of Defeat, but Gary's Mod was pretty much ground zero for me because I liked the idea of being able to make sandbox levels. It wasn't really about me. Like some people play Gmod entirely for like TTT, or they play it for prop hunt or whatever. I was never really into that. It was a creative sandbox for me. It was really the way that I could make a level and then screw around in it, spawn 400 combine, and just kill them all. It was pretty fun. But anyway, so my introduction to it was my Steam account first started to be active in 2012, 2013, 2014, and I bought Quake. I don't remember specifically what I thought about it before I bought it, but I played Quake for a long time. I wasn't even using a source port. I was using the original GL Quake executable without the soundtrack. I was playing it, and I didn't care about what any community was. I was a pretty lonely kid growing up, and I just it hadn't occurred to me that I could go and find people who were into this stuff yet. So I just kind of sat and played it on my own, but I loved it. I really enjoyed it, and I played the crap out of the first episode, and then eventually I finally beat the entire game. But I found out that Quake was the ancestor to the Source engine, and that John Romero, for Quake's 10th anniversary, I want to say, maybe? Yeah, 10th anniversary would have been 2006. He released his copies of the source files for the entire game's maps. For all of the maps, the original source files that they built using QuakeEd back in 96. Although they're not the official final ones, there's some differences, usually some differences in texturing and things, but they're close enough. And I thought, well, hey, Quake is like Source engine stuff. It's like Gary's Mod. I'll take the Quake levels and I'll put them in Gary's Mod, because nobody had done that yet. And the entire point of Gary's Mod is to steal stuff from other games. So I did that, and but I found myself kind of pretty annoyed because by the point at which uh, Half-Life 2 had come out and Source Engine stuff had come out, the way that levels were built in the Quake engine started to seem kind of archaic. Games had just become so detailed that what was highly efficient on the Quake engine was a little bit less efficient as far as the Source engine goes. So as a good example, water. Water in Quake comes down to making a brush and texturing it with a water texture, and then QBSP will handle it. Whereas with the Source engine, there's two kinds of water. There's what's called cheap water, which works similarly to that, and then there's expensive water, which is the really nice stuff that you see all over Half-Life 2, where you could see the world reflected in it, and occasionally see entities reflected in it, and where it's got the fogging and specular stuff going on. Expensive water has a ton of limitations where, for example, you cannot make sloped water. There's no such thing. It has to be totally flat, and you can't really vary up the shape of it any. It basically has to be a big block, which kind of sucked. So I would experience all of these issues trying to port all of the Quake stuff to Gary's Mod, and I was like, it's not really worth it. some of the engine, like for example, there's an entity in Quake where they call it function door secret. What it really is a 3 point moving door. You don't really need to use it for secrets. That just tends to be kind of what he used it for, and that was the name. But anyway, um, and in order to recreate that in the source engine, I had to take the door and turn it into a train, and then put it on a path that simulated the door moving in a certain way. Because if it was a function door secret, well, there's no code for that anymore in the engine. And if I was doing an engine mod, I could reintroduce it. I could make it move like that. But obviously, it wasn't. I was just doing some Gary's mod maps. So I would go through this entire level, recreating the functionality of every single door in the level. And I'd be like, is this worth it? Is this really worth it? I'd rather just go mod for real Quake. Um, and that's what I did. I looked into because I was a Hammer kid. Of course, Hammer is, I think there's some drop-in replacements for Hammer at this point. But back when I started in 2013 or so, this was right before Steam Pipe happened and totally broke the Source SDK. But every game came with a copy of Hammer in its game files. So that's what I knew. I knew Hammer. So I found that Hammer was an upgraded version of a very old level editor called Worldcraft, which came with Half-Life and was originally meant for Quake. And somebody had recreated Worldcraft and they turned it into a program called Jack. So Jack, I got that downloaded. I set up the texture files with it. I just downloaded off the internet, and I just started having fun. I just started dragging out some brushes, and it wasn't very good. I have a bunch of screenshots of the first level I ever made. It was kind of like a weird Egyptian-y kind of crypt-looking thing, and it wasn't good, but I liked it a lot more. I found it a lot more appealing than source engine maps, where everything is kind of fiddly and uh, there's detail. There's way too much detail for what it is. Quake is just kind of the blockiness works for the look of the game. So yeah, my start with Quake really came from trying to work with the source engine and hating it.
Oh boy. Yeah. Yeah, because on your website, so for like the maps you've posted, they're mostly single player, or are they all exclusively designed for single player?
The focus was single player, yes.
Okay, yeah, and then whenever anybody goes to your website, all your maps seem to have like very good documentation and everything. So like that's pretty good for people trying to like learn the engine, because learning quick mapping is a very good way of actually learning to like do any kind of project with like game modding or just game development in
It's
general.
definitely a very nice entry level engine to work with
Yeah,
because we have the engine source code, we have the scripts for all of the monsters and stuff, the progs as they're called. That's all well documented, and there's been community cleanup efforts. We have the map sources, and we have a wide lineage of tools. So yeah, I definitely think that Quake is a very very good beginner engine for somebody who's just looking to make game mods or whatever.
yeah, and then let's see. So some of these have participated in some of the jams as they call them, where it's like a bunch of a
Yeah,
compilation of stuff.
yeah.
So do you have any favorite jams you recommend to like people new to Quake?
As far as playing like community maps and stuff,
Yeah, because like obviously everyone's gonna probably go through the default or the stock levels, and then they're gonna be
yeah.
wondering, is there anything else they should look at?
Well, honestly, here's the thing about Quake. I have not been in a Quake community since 2018 or so because I I I mean, I'm not gonna make any bones about it. I used to be. I mean, every dude when they're a teenager is like horribly conceited, and I was no exception. And I made a couple of enemies here and there. I doubt anyone really remembers it now, but it's still not something that I really care to revisit. So I have not kept up with what the community has been up to really since 2018. Um, but I do have fond memories of the packs and stuff that I contributed to. I like, for example, I like to think that DM4 Jam is a pretty classic one. I think that I don't really think there's a bad level in the bunch, and I think a bunch of people were able to take DM4 the style of it and kind of extrapolate it out into a variety of different levels and level types and visual styles, and it just became a pretty vibrant pack. And if the what I've heard is correct, the guy who started that jam, I was the indirect inspiration for it because I was doing a project, and this is documented in my unfinished map section. There's some screenshots of it. Where I wanted to take the original map sources for Quake and update them with new lighting and a bit of a boost in detailing, more so just fixing texture errors, because especially in the context of the original Quake like base levels, it's pretty ragged, and I can't really fault them for that because they were working with what they had, which was not a lot. There really was not anything like Quake in 1996 when it was being developed.
Yeah.
So, uh, but I wanted to update all of those maps with a nice boost in detailing just here and there, keeping the flavor of them, but upping making the lighting a little bit nicer and a little less harsh. And I didn't get anywhere with it, but he caught wind of that and imagined, well, what would people be able to do if they reimagined a single level from the original game, and that became DM4 Jam, and I contributed a level to it, and I upgraded my entry to it for DM4 DLC, which was a kind of an upgrade pack because I guess not everybody was able to participate. So there were a couple of submissions after the pack was put together, and a couple of people went back and updated their levels. I was one of them, so um, I I contributed to DM4 Jam. I'm still pretty fond of that. Um, Honestly, I think that if somebody wants to play custom levels, I think it really depends on what they see in Quake and why they're coming to play new levels and stuff in it. If you're looking for like my thing with Quake has always been I like, and this comes with any game. I like an authentic experience or an authentic feeling experience. There's some people who their interest in a game is to take it as far as it can go and do all sorts of crazy stuff with it. I'm not really a huge fan of that. I like it when somebody makes a mod and it feels like it could have been in the original game. So my recommendations for levels often would not be the recommendations that you would get from the community themselves or maybe the most prominent level packs. So as a good example, uh, Honey, which has kind of ascended to semi-official status now that you can get it through the Steam version of Quake. Um, Honey is a very stylized mod. It's a very distinct. It's very big. It has a look to it. Um, it's not very accurate to how the original Quake was, but it's got a look all of its own. So, and people usually recommend it. Whereas I would probably be more inclined to tell people like go back to some of the earlier good levels, the stuff from like 97, 98 that is still pretty decently rated on Quidicted, and try some of those where folks were still operating more in the confines of what Quake was. And that tends to be what I prefer as opposed to doing something totally crazy. Like I remember there was a release when I was in the scene called Ter Shibboleth, I think is how you pronounce it. I could be wrong. But the whole idea was it was so big that it needed an upgrade to Quake's networking protocol because it wasn't meant for levels that big. But this guy just put together gigantic levels. And I played through a little bit of it, and I liked the gameplay of them, but I just didn't think the visual style of it, how big it was, suited Quake at all. And in some cases, the levels were just too big for comfort, you know. And so yeah, my point being that the stuff I find appealing in a game and trying to follow up with those, trying to keep the flavor and the limitations of that, that's not going to be something I expect anybody else to do. So, um,
So you like
so
keeping things vanilla, right?
yeah,
As common
that's
term.
I tend to appreciate the vanilla aesthetic, the limitations as well. Yeah.
So I'm gonna call out a few points of context for people who who have lesser understanding. So The first one, would be like DM4 Jam. It's not necessarily a deathmatch compilation of maps. So
No, it is
DM,
all single player.
yeah, so DM4 refers to the deathmatch map number 4 and the theme around it, right? Am I correct?
So DM4 is there were 6 pack-in levels with Quake,
Yeah.
for deathmatch, and some of them are better remembered than others. So, for example, DM2 is pretty famous, especially for one-on-one levels, and you don't necessarily have to play deathmatch on the deathmatch levels, but they're optimized for it. I know, for example, there was a really famous back when Quake had a huge competitive scene. Um, One of the most pivotal moments of Quake competitive history happened not on one of the DM levels, but actually on E1M3. Or maybe no, it was E1M2. My bad. Yeah, E1M2, which is a smaller sort of level, and you can play these levels in deathmatch or single player. And there's actually flags in the level uh, format where you can set entities to only appear if you're playing them in single player or if you're only playing them in deathmatch. So you can optimize a level for where it gets played. Um, but specifically for deathmatch play, it included 6 levels, and DM4, in my opinion, and I have a bit of it on my site because what you referred to as documentation is really just my post-mortems of uh, sort of where I was when I was making the levels and my inspirations and how I feel like the levels turned out. And I have a little bit of a breakdown of what I really like about DM4, which is that it is the only level out of the 6 that feels like it is focused more on form rather than detailing. So if you take a look at, for example, DM3, which is a base level, it's meant to look like a base. There's a bunch of computers. It's not an attractive level. It's not really, like I said. All the base levels have texturing errors all over the place. It wasn't a problem when people were running the game at 320 by 200 on their Pentium 100 megahertz PCs back in the day. But it is a problem now. So I don't know. Um, I didn't think it looked great, but DM4 on the other hand has aged incredibly well. Not just in terms of gameplay, but also visually, because there's not really a ton of detail. The focus is just on all these like weird angles and specifically height play, which is something that I focused on in my DM4 Jam entry. The idea of you're constantly fighting vertically, which something I really don't like when I see it in custom levels is when people make what are essentially Doom maps, but they're in Quake. And of course, anybody who doesn't know how the Doom engine works, it is technically 3D in the context that everything has a height component. It is not room over room 3D, which is where you can take a room, build it, and then stack another room on top of it. Um, so that's why some people refer to it as a 2.5D engine, because you can make a flat floor plan out of any Doom level, because it is literally just sectors. They're called sectors. So all the walls, all the floors and stuff are sectors. And you can take these sectors, ignore the height component, just draw out the outer limits of each sector and make a floor plan out of it, which is why people will call it a 2.5D engine, because it's essentially just 2D with a height component. Whereas Quake is a proper 3D engine. And something that I don't particularly like when I see it is that uh, some people, they don't think vertically, and I have this problem too. I'm not like pissing on anybody here, but you're used to thinking of things horizontally when you're building a level. You don't tend to think of things vertically. So the whole idea of DM4 was like, well, the whole flow of the deathmatch level is that people are constantly teleporting to the top of the level and then falling downwards. They're constantly scaling levels by going downstairs, or they're falling down levels. And there's a huge vertical component to it where you constantly have to be looking up and looking down to make sure that nobody is, getting you from above. And there's no other deathmatch level in Quake quite like that. There's some that, like, for example, DM6 is pretty cool. There's a little bit of a height component thing in there with all the long staircases and the atrium kind of area. Um, but there's nothing that really makes it the focus like DM4 does. So when I made my DM4 jam level, I was like, okay, well, the two things that I want to focus on are form over detailing. So make something that isn't particularly detailed but looks nice, and then also make sure that the player is constantly uh, ascending or descending and progressing vertically. Because I don't like it when people build what are essentially horizontal Quake levels where there's a little bit of a height component. Obviously, people aren't building literal flat levels, but you tend to be fighting on the same plane a lot of the times. Whereas with DM4, obviously, like I said, that wasn't really the focus of the level, and it's the same thing with my entry. I really tried to make it so you would go up this elevator and there would be scrags over you, and you'd be fighting vertically, or where you would be at the top of an area and you would drop down and you would be able to sort of get the jump on an enemy, or there'd be ogres over you on these catwalks and they'd be raining grenades down on you. The whole idea is that the verticality is constantly emphasized, and something that I always try to do when I'm making these levels is to emphasize that, because Quake is a proper true 3D engine. So I think it kind of cheats Quake a little bit when people just kind of treat it like Doom. But that's I think what makes DM4 kind of age the best out of any of the pack-in levels, is that it's just so not like the others.
Yeah, I think that's why maps like ZTN DM3, and there's another one that's escaping me. It has pretty much that same layout where it's very layered, where it's like the flow of the fight goes by pretty well because there's multiple ways you could approach your enemy. It's not just like, oh, I'm just gonna turn this corner and he's turning a different corner. It's just like a rabbit chase at that point.
Yeah,
Where at ZTN DM3 or DM4, for example, it's like, oh, I could probably like strategize and then like trick my opponent to like probably go through the teleport. I already know where it is. So I'm just gonna jump from top to bottom and do
yeah,
something weird. There's like a lot of room
yeah,
for exploration too.
and
Um,
for what it's worth, uh, deathmatch levels, because to update the amount of detail and the amount of enemies you could put in a level, you need to change the network protocol, which means breaking compatibility with other Quake World engines. Deathmatch levels tend to be a lot less focused on the detailing, and they tend to be focused a lot more on
Geometry.
interesting layouts. So I definitely, as little as I've really played of Quake DM, mostly just because I've never found a Quake World engine that I particularly like the feel of. I think they all kind of change the way that Quake feels. It's never particularly great. But the little of it I played, I do like it when levels have that. They have that height component going on where, because if you think of real warfare, whoever has the highest point um, has gravity on their side. So, if you have a bunch of boulders on top of a hill, you don't need to do anything to kill people coming up the hill. You just need to roll the boulders down. As opposed to if you're ascending that hill, you have to dodge the boulders, and you're also fighting gravity, so you're physically getting tired as well. And as a result, there's I noticed with DM4, there's the level tends to flow down and out. So uh, say you spawn on the top level, or you go into the teleporter and you come out the top level, um, there's nowhere to go but down. So the action is always focused on whoever is underneath you, which means that there's constantly a rush to get back to the top ground, so that way you're not a sitting duck. And I think it creates a more frazzled uh, experience when, as opposed to everything being strictly on the same plane, you're constantly like, there are things that aren't necessarily in your view immediately, so you're always more on alert. I think it just makes for a more interesting level in Quake.
Yeah, precisely because it's less predictable than a flat plain map. I don't know. Let's see. In Mario Kart, there's a map. I forgot what it's called, castles or something. Where it's like four corners, different colored corners, and it you travel it through like different heights and everything. And I think that's the most fun map because it's less predictable. You're not sure where you're gonna be able to approach your enemy from than
Oh, you're
compared
talking
to
about the battle levels?
I think the battle levels is what I'm talking about. Yeah, because Mario Kart has a battle level in N64.
Yeah. Yeah, I've played some of the battle levels as well, and
Yeah, and what you want
yeah,
to avoid is like predictability in a multiplayer map. Uh, like okay, make sure there's flow and everything, but like if it's predictable, like, and it's easier for that to
well,
happen on flat
here's
plane.
the thing. Having flow and not being predictable aren't really they're two different concepts.
Yeah.
Um, because the idea of flow is that you'll be able to uh, approach uh,
It's a deep dive concept too, because it's like trying to like get into both of those topics.
well, so the idea of flow is that you can get to any part of the level from any other part of the level,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
and at least in terms of deathmatch, if you think of, for example, DM2, which is the one with the gigantic room where the floor you can press buttons and the floor it will actually pull out and you fall in the lava if you get stuck there. Um, there are a couple of quote unquote dead ends with DM2, and it's just kind of the what feels natural is the progression through the level. Um, and the thing about dead ends is that they're occasionally kind of frustrating because it's fairly easy to get cornered, and you don't really have an escape other than hope your gun is bigger than the other guy's. Um, so as far as deathmatch goes, but they do make things more interesting, and usually there tends to be kind of a risk reward thing. So they recognize that that stuff is kind of frustrating, and they put something really nice in that hallway as a result. So that way, if you do make it out alive, you're rewarded for taking the risk, as opposed to you just go down a dead hallway and die, and there's nothing there. So it's just kind of like, uh, what was the point of that? So flow is one thing, but as far as predictability goes, the nice thing about deathmatch is that um, predictability tends to be masked by the fact that people are playing, are doing deathmatch on it. And
Yeah.
so long as there's different strategies on each level, it's kind of hard to predict exactly where. So, for example, if you have a simple deathmatch level where it's a bunch of rooms and then a big room with a rocket launcher on top. The only objective in that level is to get the rocket launcher. That's the predictability part. At that point, the movement through the level doesn't even matter. The only objective is to get that rocket launcher, and as a result, um, you're going to be doing the same thing for 20 minutes. You're going to be trying to get that rocket launcher. Whereas if you put multiple objectives, quote unquote, in a deathmatch level, people can take different approaches. So, for example, let's say you add another pathway through the level where there's red armor. Okay, so now there's two objectives. You can either go for the rocket launcher, which means that you have a lot more firepower, but you don't have as much protection, or the reverse by going for the red armor. And if somebody can manage to make it both, well, they must be a really good player because, of course, those two lynch points, people are going to be fighting for them. So there's going to be a lot of fireworks going on in those areas. So it's not so much that if your level flows well, it's predictable. It's more a matter of if your level doesn't have enough in it to do, it's going to be kind of predictable. Really, you should be separating out the weapons, the good weapons from the good armor, from the health.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
Not
part of
not so
the
much that,
balancing.
yeah, it's
Um,
not so much that people can't get a refill or they can't get health in a pinch, but you want to be thinking like a deathmatch player, where your idea isn't necessarily just to kill, although obviously that's your goal. Your idea is more, okay, well, where am I going with this? How am I going to kill as effectively as possible? The reason why people go for the rocket launcher is because the rocket launcher is so effective as a weapon. So uh, you then have to go, okay, well, how can I balance out something that people very much want with making it treacherous to get there? And that's where your traps come in. I don't see a lot of traps in deathmatch levels, but they're pretty cool. Um, that's where, for example, you'll want to put a very high level weapon where there's a lot of foot traffic because people are more likely to get caught in battles over it. And that makes for more exciting gameplay. So, as a good example, I mentioned E1M2 being a pretty popular one-on-one deathmatch level, and that's because there's a single quad. There's a quad. I forgot about the power-ups, but the same difference
Right,
basically.
right, right.
There's a quad in a secret in a corner of that one of the levels or one of the areas in the level. So you have to go out of your way to get that quad, and then you have to go out of your way to find your opponent. So the goal really is to be able to maximize how long you can use it. So your opponent can't be too far away, but also you don't want them to be directly in the same room, and you have to fight them to the death and potentially not have that much health left. And um, obviously, if they can get a nice shot on you while you have the quad, they can still kill you. So it's a lot of strategizing. It's a lot of um, hoping you know where your opponent is and trying to lead them. And uh, there's a risk reward balance, you know. So if you do manage to get it, you could do a lot of damage, but it might be pretty tricky to get there because everybody's trying to get there. Um, it's the kind of thing where you can talk about all day in the abstract, but it really depends on the level. You really have to be building a level in order to speak specifically on like, is this balanced?
Yeah, so like I have a deathmatch map that I've already I've considered final not retail, what is it, like public release. So the
Yeah.
way I balance that map, it's have you played Army Men, the
Uh,
Sarge's Heroes?
I'll probably get
Um,
the gist. I have not played those, but I'll probably get the gist of what you're saying. Anyway.
okay, so in Army Men Sarge's Heroes, there's a map called Sandcastle, and that's a pretty simple map I like to recreate in several games. So that's the one I based off my first map, and then the way it flows is that there's two heights. So there's a top of the castle, sand castle, and then there's a floor. And then so basically what you want to do is incentivize people to go to one castle and have them decide which castle they want to control compared to like what does the other one offer. And then there should also be reasons why they're going to go through the corridors. And then what I also did was added a third and fourth level to that map. And then it's going to be easier to get to the top one because it's it's stairs, right? And then you climb the top of the middle one, and there's like a massive health pickup. And then, but why do you want to go for that massive health pickup when there's like a bigger or stronger weapon at the lower floor that you could be going after instead? So you got to like incentivize people to like Well, yeah, I'm repeating myself at that point where
Yeah.
it's like, why do you want to go there instead of here?
Yeah,
And
and
it's
it's all about objectives, and that's what I usually find as far as single player levels as well, where it's more about uh, making interesting encounters and connecting things in an interesting way, as opposed to deathmatch where everything is meant to be really silky and flowing well. But they both rely on the concept of objectives. So one of the most common id level types, and this happens in Doom as well, is that you will be presented near the start of the level with a locked door, and then you are given a third path or a second path to go find that key. So, as a great example, um, the second level of Doom, Doom the first episode, uh, you're presented with the rightmost part of the level, which isn't particularly big, but there's a red key card. And then in order to progress later on the other side of that room is the red door. So you're told go find this. So that's an objective. And if you're looking to keep things really controlled as far as the single player experience goes, you want to uh, think in terms of objectives. So here is this chunk of the level. What is the goal of this chunk of the level? And then you make that a satisfying, almost like mini level, you know? Um, yeah, I mean, I'll check it out. I don't really have anyone to play deathmatch with, so.
Oh no, that's okay. No, I mean it's like so you can get like the idea of what I was talking about, and it's
All
to
right,
help you
yeah, no, I
visualize
got
it.
you.
Yeah,
That's all
yeah.
right. Um,
Okay, but yeah.
but yeah,
Yeah, yeah. For single player maps, yeah, because like some of the maps, that I've gotten a chance to play, because I don't really play single player outside of like once a year ritual where I go through Quake. Um,
honestly,
you know,
I mean, I don't really begrudge anyone the deathmatch stuff because I
yeah,
have certainly logged hundreds of hours on Half-Life 2 deathmatch. I enjoy it. But as far as Quake goes, I'm definitely more partial to the single player experience just because uh, I think Quake's monsters are interesting, and there's a lot of moving parts to a level that I particularly like that I don't think the focus is really on in deathmatch. Although you can certainly add single player elements into a deathmatch context to make it more interesting. But for me personally, um, yeah, I definitely am more partial to single player, and it just helps that I don't need anyone else to play it with. You know?
right. Yeah, here's the thing, like the differences like between Quake and other games, is that everything in Quake is deliberate. Like how we were talking about, like, okay, so the focus of a deathmatch map versus a single player map, they're like, they share stuff, but like, everything's deliberate for the purpose, right? There's nothing like, oh, the engine provided me like some generator that I could just put here and then, just give people whatever to do. You have to guide your players through like a map. You're trying to tell them a story. You know,
Yeah,
you're planting those enemies there by hand. It's not, like, oh, okay, like I'm just gonna give the game, here's a block right here. Let's call it the activator. You place that
yeah,
block, and then it's not the game's not gonna know, like, you're not. Okay, hold on. Let's see. You're placing the monsters by hand. There's no instructions. You're giving the map on how to behave with the monsters, or how to like treat them or anything. Everything's placed by hand. Everything's deliberate. There's nothing random going on in Quake.
yeah. And I think that a bunch of Quake likes have that same thing going on. Um, it's a more of a matter of trying to balance because I look at modern levels and I don't deny that there's gameplay involved, but it's very much more a graphical pursuit in making the level feel like a believable space and like making it appealing to look at. And it's not really where my interest is. I feel like that's more for the 3D modeler side of things, where people come at it from, oh, I do art stuff and here's my 3D models, whatever, as opposed to older games where there's a little bit of art and a little bit of trying to make the lighting dramatic or whatever. Um, but there's only so much detail you can add to a Quake level. I mean, you can add more or less, but I find that Quake stops looking like Quake when it's particularly detailed. And I think there are some community levels that hit that where it's like, it just looks like somebody put Quake textures on a 3D model. I don't like it. Um, but that's just me personally. Um, so with with Quake though, yeah, there's the balancing of the artistic aspect. So for example, which textures you're using. Um, there's the artistic aspect of it with your lighting and your layouts and the little bit of detail that you put in there. And then also you're trying to base both of those around making most efficient use of the enemies. Because each enemy has their own specific way of behaving. And this is something that I actually do like about the Source engine. Uh, where the enemy AI, as long as you build a level that they take good advantage of, is excellent. Is absolutely, it's obviously not the brightest thing ever, but it's effective. So for Half-Life 2, you have your Combine soldiers, and then what you would do is you would node the level, so you would define where specifically they can walk, and then uh, their AI suddenly knows, okay, well here's this isolated node just on one branch of a hallway, basically, and we can hide in here. Or if somebody's around the corner, we can flush them out with a grenade. I find that brilliant. I really like that. And it's something you can kind of sort of do with Quake. Not really, because Quake doesn't really have any monsters that work in packs. It's very much more a matter of every enemy feels kind of solitary. Obviously, you can put multiple of them together, but they don't group in an interesting way. Um, but you can still have them like walk paths and stuff, and there is a lot of care that you can put into a Quake level that I feel like when game engines became a little bit more graphically involved, the focus kind of became less on that. I feel like something like Quake is or even Half-Life, the first Half-Life. I'm not too terribly fond of working with Gold Source. It's okay, but there's some of the kind of crufty buildup that you would see with the Source engine in Gold Source, where they were trying to make it do things that Quake was not built to do. Um, but it's all right. It's a nice enough engine, and it's like that perfect balance between the visual aspect of things where you can make believable spaces, as opposed to something like Wolfenstein or even Doom to a lesser extent, where it's sort of like, well, where really am I? It just kind of feels like I'm in a game space. Quake, you can really build a location and have it feel like a location, but also have it work as a really slick game level. And I kind of brushed off the question earlier, but as far as custom levels for Quake that I really like, as far as a lot of people found it pretty mediocre, but I really appreciated Dopa, the Machine Games Dimensions of the Past episode. I really liked the look of it. I thought it was a really nice looking pack, and I really liked the way that it still felt like Quake, but it felt like a nice upgraded version of it. It felt like it was still true to the original, but it it had a nice layer of polish on it. And then also, as far as custom levels go, there's a couple of them that I have downloaded that I still need to play through. But I really, really like Zendar, the Horde of Zendar, which Simon O'Callaghan Sock is. I don't know if he's still the golden boy of the Quake scene, but he was pretty revolutionary because a lot of the ideas and concepts that he was really the first to do them. So the sort of very polished, nice, very sprawling map design that you see in a lot of custom Quake levels, he was really the first guy to do that kind of stuff. And he comes from, I believe he worked with, I think he was working with Splash Damage. So he would have been working on like Return to Castle Wolfenstein and stuff. So he was already a professional game developer, level designer when he started working on Quake. So he took that experience and put it back into this mod scene. Um, but my favorite level of his, and some of his levels are kind of hit and miss with me. Like I mentioned earlier, I don't like stuff that's super detailed. I feel like Sepulture, the Forgotten Sepulture, I think is what it's called, uh,
Let's see.
which kind of broke records for being the Arcane Dimensions level that was like the most crazy detailed of the lot. Like it needed uh, engine upgrades just to be able to run it. I thought it was overkill. I thought it was kind of like, it doesn't really feel like Quake anymore. But the Horde of Zendar is one of his earlier levels, and I love that level. That's fantastic because it's a very nice looking level. It's very well put together. There's a lot of like the whole idea is that you're going into a city that has been driven mad for some reason. So it's a little, uh, you go through the city gates and everything is very compact. But there's a lot to explore. There's a lot of different like tunnels and um, houses even to explore. Even though there's no real furniture in them, there's the implication of something bigger beyond what you can access in just the normal concept of the game level. And that I think is as far as I like Quake to go. I really like the fact that it's nicely detailed. It plays really well. It doesn't try to do anything too out of the ordinary, but it still puts a more open world spin on Quake, which is in general a very linear and very kind of claustrophobic experience. And again, like I said, I appreciate a vanilla experience. I try to build my levels around what would have been possible with vanilla. It doesn't always happen, but I try to. And yeah, so I really like that one. That feels like as far as I comfortably like Quake to go. So there's two examples of like custom levels and stuff that I do like.
So DOPA and Horde of Zendar.
I think that's
Uh,
what it's called. Let me look that up real quick before I make myself look like I mean I've
it's
already said
okay.
it. So
I looked it up. So there's three I got. So it's Dimensions of or DOPA and Horde of
yes, it is Horde of
Zendar
Zendar. That is exactly what it's called. And there's a
and
version for
Forgotten Sepulture.
Vanilla Quake, which is its own mod, and then there's a version for Arcane Dimensions. They're both pretty good.
Okay, yeah. So then
Uh,
you also
yeah,
mentioned Forgotten Sepulture, I think.
that was a level that really made like a lot of headlines, and I saw a lot of screenshots of it because it is so crazy detailed and big that it took some engine upgrades to be able to run it. I don't that didn't do a whole lot for me. I appreciate the detailing, but personally, I just like my Quake a little bit tinier than that.
Right, because like as modding for Quake got more advanced, it went from texture play to like a showcase of like how much detail can you force into Quake as far as polygon counts go, all that stuff,
Yeah, and
lighting.
there's room for it, and I say this, and suddenly other levels I really liked from Arcane Dimensions start coming back to me. There was the Mire, I think it was called. I'm trying to remember what that one was based on. Let me actually hold on. Arcane Dimensions maps. Let's see what maps come with it. See if I can remember. Predicted. So there's the Ogre Bastille. That's another sock level. I really liked that one. Um, the City of Zendar is the upgraded version that comes with Arcane Dimensions. Where is it? Uh, how is it not listed? Is it not like an official pack-in level? All right, I'll look it up on Quidicted. Whatever. Screw it. I know it came with my copy of Arcane Dimensions. I just don't remember, but I'll. And it's not listed on there. Oh my god.
Because
I'm gonna
there's
have to.
ever since Arcane Dimensions has come out, like there's people that have made add-on levels or add-on map packs as well. So let's see, there's like so many of
Oh,
them.
obsessive brick disorder. I forgot about that one. You know what? I've said I probably made it sound like I don't particularly like Sock. Honestly, I've played more levels of his that I like than ones that I haven't. And obsessive brick disorder is also like a really fantastic looking one. Like I one thing that I do like is that I take visual aspects from the levels that I play that I like, even if they're a little bit overcooked visually to my taste, and I sort of warp them into what I kind of think looks a little bit more vanilla. But as far as obsessive brick disorder goes, yeah, I really like the look of that one, and I really like the play of that one too. That's another one that comes with Arcane Dimensions. Um, Files in the zip archive. Maybe I can remember what it was called, so I can actually. It was called the Mire. There's a map called that. I'm just trying to figure out what the name of it was specifically. Um, those are.
The
Was
only
it
one that
E2M7?
it looks like it's listed as ADDM5.
ADDM5, I think is what you're. I think you're correct. That one's really fun too. That one was put together by I don't remember the name.
Ionis?
Ionius, yes.
Okay,
He was
yeah.
a guy who put together one of the last packs that I remember uh, while I was still in the scene was, I think was it 100 brushes? I don't know if it was. It used Quoth. I know that. It used Quoth. I know that one was listed on Quidicted. Let me go check that real quick. So
Oh
let's
yeah, that's
see.
another context I wanted to touch up for
Yeah,
people who so Quaddicted there's let's see, so it's basically a website that hosts so many single player maps, but they also provide a tool so you could download those single player maps onto the game without having to like manually set it up. So like for games
yeah.
like that rely on Copper Quake, you don't have to like set up Copper Quake and then you have to figure out like what else is missing. It'll do all that kind of stuff for you, but it also sorts the maps out by most popular, the date of release, and also by name, of course. That'd be obvious. It's
Yeah.
also a great way to get into Quake. Once you get into or want to go beyond the single player stock maps, that's a perfect way to explore further. Quake mapping and stuff. If you're looking for inspiration or just want to see what people are capable of doing, with a
And
primitive
there's a
engine.
couple in here actually that I totally forgot. Um, I remember, and I'm glad he finally got hired. Uh, to do actual level design stuff because I thought he was a cool dude. His name was Muck. Mukor, Muck. I don't know. I always called him Muck because he kind of had a. I think he had the Pokemon Muck as his icon at one point or something like that. I don't know. But anyway, he had a level that was kind of cool. That was like it was a recreation of Dust, D Dust, in Quake, and the whole idea was that it was a slaughter map. It was the first slaughter map I'd ever played that I actually liked. It didn't feel like it didn't feel like gratuitous for the sake of it. It was very structured. So you would go into a specific area and press a button, and then it would be because the whole point of it was like a combat simulator. So the D Dust map that you can find on Quidicted is pretty fantastic. I'd recommend that. I
Um,
will find what I'm referring to as far as this Quoth pack.
okay, let's see.
But
So
I remember, yeah,
the one you're referring to, it requires Arcane Dimensions, and its full name is Disengage the Simulator. Is it that one?
yeah, yeah, that's it. Okay,
Okay.
it was 100B4, was it? Ionius was part of it, yeah. Yeah, so that was somebody they did another 100 brush map uh contest, and yeah, indeed. Wow. I wonder how many of these folks are still around. Um cuz I just see the names like of folks that I recognize when I was still there. Um I don't know. It was weird. Kind of looking back, I find that there was a certain disconnect. Not to focus on the people or anything, because obviously we're here for Quake.
Yeah.
But yeah, I felt like there was a certain disconnect between me and everybody else, where I sort of I guess I don't know. I didn't have the same aims as them, and I probably came off the wrong way. But such is life. There was a lot of really talented people and a lot of fun maps at the time that I remember playing. That's what I'm thinking of. So okay, so this is what I was thinking of. Ionius made a 100 brush map using Quoth before the competition had started, and I remember playing that and really liking it. I don't know if that was Luna and Silver Shards. That was the name of it. Yes, and it was textured using Hexen 2 textures, which is pretty cool. And it's another vertical map, and I feel like uh I feel like I might have gotten to play an early build of it before it got uploaded to Quidicted for people officially, but I really like that. That was another Quoth level, and that was sort of the inspiration behind 100B4. So that's another one that I remember really liking.
So let's see. So for anybody that doesn't know, Quath basically is a quote unquote expansion pack for Quake. Um, it basically adds a few extra you know let's see, in terms of map making, it'll add like functions. I can't remember what else it adds though.
Okay, so what Quoth is it's a mod base. So what it is it adds new monsters, it adds some functionality that you really want in mapping. Um, but the whole point of it is that it is a new base that anybody can base a level on and have upgraded functionality that still feels like Quake. That is still Quake based, but there's like I said, new monsters and uh, new entities and stuff like that. And so what this is a Quoth level that uses all those new monsters and whatever. And uh, yeah, I don't know. I really like it. Anyway, go play that one.
Yeah. So yeah, again, like that's one of the things Quadicted is gonna, or actually no, that's not Quadicted. Sorry, anybody that's taking notes, look up Quake Injector. That's the software you want. It pretty much handles all the requirements, dependencies
I
and all
kind
that
of
stuff.
I really wish that Mark V caught on. Mark V is still my preferred Quake source port, even if it's not actively updated anymore. It had a built-in Quadicted injector where you could just type in the console install and then the name of the pack, and it would handle it for you without needing a separate Quake injector. I really liked that. I really like the fact that it had like a software renderer. I felt like it was like the most polished of but yet still official feeling of all the Quake engines as opposed to uh, Quake Spasm, which, as far as I know, I think the community uses a completely different flavor of Quake Spasm at this point. Like it got forked or something like that. I don't keep up with the Quake scene. That's my thing. Is that while I have a couple of Quake levels up, and I think the one that I made in 2020, which I made for my friend Newhouse, who is the only person in the Quake scene I actually still talk to. He's cool. He came to me the one day and he said uh, asked if I was interested in being the guest mapper on his Blue episode project, and I was. So I made something in about a month or so, and it got so big it had to be 2 levels, and I put all these different ideas and traps and callbacks to earlier Quake maps and stuff in them, and I was really proud of how that came out. So, and I still am. I still really like those levels, and it takes me a long time to beat. So I figure most folks it'll take a long time for them to beat it too. But yeah. So occasionally I'll still make a level, and I have my levels up, but I don't know what's going on in the scene at this point, and I if on the rare occasion that I do make a level, I'll post it to Funk message board or whatever, and be like, hey, if you want to play a new level, here you go. But yeah, I think that sort of my time in that scene is gone. So if I'm a little clueless, you know why.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, I mean, because it's the Quake community is kind of what do you call it, segregated sort of,
I
because
should say the single player Quake community because I know that the deathmatch folks tend to be a completely different scene.
yeah, it definitely is. Like there's very noticeable disparities between the two. Like some will focus on certain aspects of Quakes where the others won't care. But yeah, that's kind of a segregated community. Because there's like different approaches you could take to Quake. There's creative, approaches. Basically the fun one where you just play the game, and then there's like the one where you explore all the custom mods. Okay, mods are on a completely entire different topic. It's gonna take a long time to like cover all of that, but so apart from mods, there's maps, which is an endless supply. Um,
Yeah, I highly doubt that there's anybody who's ever played everything on Quidicted, and probably I remember Here's a funny story. I remember there was a project that I had wanted to undertake that I called the Quidicted Project. Or maybe is it the Quidicted Project? I don't think it was. No, the Quick. I don't remember necessarily what I called it. Oh shit. Uh, the Quidicted something. Quidicted Challenge. That was the word. The Quidicted Challenge, where I wanted to play through every single level on Quidicted and write up something about it. And I got like 3 maps in, and that was about it. I got it was alphabetical. I got 3 maps in, and I can't imagine what people had thought of that. I can't imagine people had thought I was the dumbest fucking kid because there are I don't know how many maps there are on Quidicted. Let me go check. Um,
Because they go back as far as around the time Quake
uh,
came out. That's how
yeah,
far
there's
back it
some there's
goes.
some yeah there's some levels from uh back
96.
when Quake was a thing.
Yeah, and then like you could see in those early maps, like it's like I don't know, it's like you could see the big differences between the stock maps where it's like actually uh I don't want to call them paid developers, experienced people versus like amateurs. And now like trying to compare maps coming out today to like back then, it's a huge leap. They like pretty much surpass what the official developers did on the original Quake.
Yeah, yeah, by far. And I think that's an inevitability of any scene that people have uh,
What?
any interest in uh, for a long period of time. The Doom scene has well surpassed that. They were hitting that back in the early 2000s or so, where uh, you had the Doom engine being what it was, and then once the source code came out, folks were putting together uh, new source ports that basically ignored the original game's rendering entirely. So there was no there. So now it was OpenGL accelerated and properly 3D, and you could have actual look up and look down, um, which is cool. I think at that point I'd rather just play Quake. I like the feeling of Doom for Doom's sake. By the way, I I if the file base listing on Quidicted is to be believed, there are over 1,800 single player maps on uh, on Quidicted. So even if I played a single one each day, it would have taken me 5 or 6 years.
Oh man.
And uh, yeah, so I imagine that was probably a little bit of the hubris that made people not particularly like me. But what can I say? I was like 17 at the time. Nobody expects a 17-year-old to be particularly bright, but whatever.
Right, like just having the unrealistic expectation that maybe one day you'll be able to claim that you played every single codected map.
That's not gonna happen.
Never. Not in this lifetime, not in any other. But yeah. So, I guess are there any shout outs you want to give out to people?
I mean, as far as my modding stuff goes, it all pretty much happens in Mile Hacks. I can't really say everybody should go join it because we are a little bit picky about. I mean, it's a public server. Don't get me wrong; anybody can join it, but there's a certain type of person that we like. Somebody who is maybe a little bit more interested in the modding of these games and a little bit more hands on and keeps up with the community stuff. But if you are interested in doing uh, any kind of modding work with Guitar Hero or Rock Band, Amplitude, um, Karaoke Revolution, any of the harmonics games, Milo Hacks is pretty much the place to go. And on the Quake end of things, all I could say is look up any map that's made by Newhouse and play it because he's freaking crazy underrated.
And then
That's about it.
from here on out, you're free to say just anything you want to touch back up on. I
Uh,
did want to bring this up. So when you were talking about your retro gaming experience, or I'm sorry, your
yeah,
earliest experience, I have my Namco museum on hand. I was gonna talk a little bit about it because it's like You know what's crazy about it is that there's not much information on the arrangements because these arrangements weren't made for this compilation. They were made for
Yeah,
a
they
collection
were
on the arcade.
originally, yeah, they were arcade titles.
Yeah, and then I don't know if you've heard of the Mr. FPGA project. But basically, I
Yeah,
put in a request that they you know get the schematics and make a core out of these games specifically because I really like the Galaga on this one over
the
any other
Galaga arrangement's
Galaga.
pretty fun.
Yeah,
I
it's my
think
favorite one.
that as far as emulating arcade hardware goes, that stuff takes dedication
It
because
does.
at least when it's a home console, which don't get me wrong, also takes a ton of dedication and it takes smarter people than me. But at least that's a single console with definable behavior. Whereas if you're trying to emulate arcade parts, you have to simulate every single individual board, um, because arcade games were built for that specific game. Of course, there are exceptions. You have, like for example, the Neo Geo arcade setup, which people could switch out the cartridges for and be able to play different games or whatever on them. But it was still, a very highly specialized, dedicated piece of arcade hardware. Um, and then certainly if you're going back as far as the golden age of arcade games, which is where, my tastes personally lie, like with the Williams games, and your Robotrons and your Jousts and stuff, those are all awesome. Um, those games were doing some absolutely wild stuff as far as uh, their hardware was concerned. So like I was trying to explain to somebody the other day about why certain Atari games are so mind blowing. And there's a homebrew project that somebody got. Actually, a guy named John Champeau, I think his name is. But he runs an Atari homebrew little operation called Champ Games, and he was actually a big programmer of uh, PC arcade translations for DOS. So he would take Pac-Man or Centipede or Donkey Kong, recreate it as accurately as possible, and put it out in the 90s on shareware channels like AOL Games, for example, for people to download. Um, so that way they could play these arcade games on their home computers. You know, and these you can still download them. There's actually a site that has them all archived, and John himself has given his blessing. But he now works entirely on Atari 2600 homebrew, and he's done several. He's done Conquest of Mars. He's done Ladybug, two versions of Ladybug, which is a Pac-Man clone with a movable maze, which is really cool. He did, I think he did a port of Mappy for the Atari. But the most impressive one to me is that he managed to make a port of Robotron 2084 to the Atari. And reading up on the way that the arcade game was built gives you a real appreciation for how absolutely crazy that hardware is for 1982. Whereas, the Atari has two bitmapped sprites for the player. That's all it has is two bitmap sprites, two missile sprites, and then a ball sprite. That's all it has for hardware sprites. The actual arcade hardware for Robotron supports, I think, something like 80 objects on screen at once, all moving independently of each other using two blitter chips. And it's like that stuff was not common in arcade machines. That stuff was highly specialized. So the fact that this man managed to simulate a game where there's nearly 100 moving objects on screen and he managed to put it on the Atari, where there are no hardware, there are no software sprites, there's no frame buffer, there's no anything really. It's a total mismatch for the hardware, but he managed to make it work pretty successfully, and that gives you a real appreciation of how even back in the golden age of arcade, uh, the hardware was pretty crazy, and that only became more apparent by the 90s, where suddenly rather than just these custom 2D chipsets, all of a sudden there were 3D games going on. And I know, for example, 3DS, not 3DS, 3DFX. So the Voodoo cards, they were occasionally used in arcade titles, like Cruisin' USA, for example, and Cruisin' World. They run on Glide, they run on 3DFX chips, which is pretty cool. But of course, that means that you have to then emulate a glide setup to get those arcade games running. So, um, as far as FPGA stuff goes, I'm really curious to see how it turns out, and I hope it is cost effective at some point because the concept of hardware perfect emulation through cores is, after years and years of, I was a really early adopter of, I'd probably say the next generation of emulators, so fifth generation consoles onward, Project 64, all that stuff. I played it on my crappy 2007 hand built Celeron, and I had to run it full screen to stifle the DirectX errors I would constantly get playing GoldenEye or something. Um, I guess I should say it was early for me. It's not so much that it wasn't around. I'm not saying I was earlier to that party or anything. But anyway, my point being, um, you deal with software emulators for a long, long time. There's always going to be imperfections about it because there's simply parts of, even if the behavior is exactly the same, there's simply parts of those consoles that cannot be accurately emulated. For example, the exact graphic pipeline of the Wii. Like I'm a big fan of the Dolphin progress reports. I love reading those, and they've made it clear that like we cannot accurately emulate what the Wii is doing as far as its graphics go because it would just be too slow and it wouldn't be easily translatable to uh, normal graphics hardware, the stuff you actually get in a computer. And those are the trade-offs that you get with a software emulator. Whereas the concept of a hardware emulator that folks can get a guaranteed perfect translation of, I mean, pending errors in the core itself, but usually those are found pretty quickly. Um, that's promising. That's super promising. So yeah, I do hope that the FPGA stuff comes down in price and it becomes more mature, developed, because it is probably the most promising thing to happen in emulation in the entire run of emulation.
Yeah, because it's like I was very skeptical about it when I first heard about it because I'm like, well, are they really, is there anything special about it, or am I just being sold, a fancier Raspberry Pi? And
Yeah, I gotcha.
once I got my hands on mine, it's like, whoa, there's like no input delay. But these people have actually put in a lot of work to like actually recreate the hardware, specifications, the clock speeds and everything. It's not
Yeah,
perfect yet. It's there's still some like stuff. I've come across like certain Super Nintendo games where like the rendering is still off, where you see like stretched textures because they're using mode 7 where
yeah,
where they shouldn't look that way. It's understandable. It's like I think somewhere between 3 to 5 years. It's like, that's a lot of quick progress in that amount of time.
yeah.
So
And it's it's absolutely like there. It's very rare that new technological improvements particularly appeal to me. I don't care a lot of the time. I find that a lot of what people tend to be excited about in technology these days is a lot of snake oil. But FPGA has the potential to make all software emulators obsolete, essentially. If the technology were to become streamlined enough and the cores were able to mature enough, and there's no reason they won't be. So, yeah, definitely something to look out for, and nothing but respect for that community and what they're doing as far as preserving stuff goes. Because another thing is too, it would suck if one day we weren't able to play these games on any kind of hardware that is accurate to how they were originally experienced. And it's going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon necessarily, but already some of the more obscure consoles are already kind of getting difficult to find, and the idea of a hardware replica of that is really appealing. Like the old NES on a chip style stuff. I really like that.
yeah,
Um,
like comparing a classic clone console, like NES is the most popular one because that's the one that was that's a console that got a clone that was commercially available.
yeah,
And then comparing those to like right now, they're still nowhere close to like being fully compatible with the entire library as a real NES. I don't know what's going on. Where are the clone guys? Like, lacking. Like, what's going on? And then,
Yeah.
with FPGA so far, every game you throw at the NES core, it's like, whoa, it just runs. There's no, serious incompatibilities aren't going on here versus a clone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Um,
yeah,
so anything else you want to like put out there for everybody to, hear?
I'm gonna go eat dinner.
Nice. What are you gonna have for dinner?
I actually don't remember, but I'm all I know is that I'm really really hungry and thirsty too because I've been talking for an hour and a half. So
I apologize.
it's
Um,
it's good. I appreciate it.
all right. Well, I appreciate taking taking some of your time out of your day to get you on this podcast. Hopefully, it brings even much more attention to the Guitar Hero 2 project you're working on. And
Yeah.
I really hope you come back to Quake single player map making someday.
I will. I have ideas and stuff for a whole lot of projects, and I'd also like to put together um like some kind of Doom wad at some point, something that appeals to because as far as like the Doom episodes go, it's kind of like Quake has it to a lesser extent, but there's a certain point in Doom where I just feel like it's just too big and it's too maze like and it's not really fun to go playing through these levels. But that first episode, that shareware episode, I love how quick and slick it is. I love how it just feels like an arcade game, and that's what I like. That's what I like in Quake. That's what I like in Doom. And there's just a bunch of games that I'd really like to be able to put together levels for. Doom, some more stuff for Quake. I haven't ruled out potentially coming back to other Quake likes. Of course, there's the entire id Tech engine for Quake 2 and Quake 3, and then how it branches off with Gold Source and then the Source engine. There's a bunch of possibilities. There's a bunch of possibilities all over the place for modding stuff that I would like to do. It's a matter of do I have I have the time. It's do I have the energy and is it a good idea? Because I just get busy with so many different projects. I do a lot outside of modding too, and of course I'm also trying to work on real life stuff. So it's very much not like my main focus. Some people, their entire hobby is game modding. Mine cannot be all game modding. So it's definitely a someday thing, but I just got to balance it out with stuff my friends actually like.
Yeah, yeah, it's important to diversify, your hobbies and stuff so you don't burn out on one. You always have something else to fall back on,
Yeah,
when things start to
absolutely.
slow down. Yeah.
Um, yeah, that'll about do it. Thanks for having me on.
No problem. So let's see. I hope to keep up with you and stuff on your because I know I'm gonna eventually get a PS2 working again.
Yeah,
So I hope I get to like see more of your stuff because I know you recently released the Guitar Hero Rock the 360.
yeah, and that's like I told you, that's a disc of all of the 360 exclusive Guitar Hero 2 songs. I ported them over. I didn't just port them over. I also did a ton of bug fixes because by that point, Harmonix's quality control was totally out the window. So there's broken venue control stuff. Occasionally, there's like missing notes, and the charts generally play. There's even one example of a chart that you can't FC even if you hit all the notes because they put a note past the end of the song. So it was just a bunch of little things that I had to fix in all the DLC. But in a weird funny way, it's honestly more definitive than playing the literal actual DLC on an Xbox 360. So I like
All right.
you know
Well,
I yeah.
yeah. All right. So I'll catch you next time. All right.
Okay.
Yep.
Thanks for having me on.
No problem. Bye.